Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to today's physics class. Today is the second class of the chapter 13, that is modern physics and electronics. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So in the previous class, first class, we have discussed about some concepts, stable and unstable isotopes. We have seen that in a nucleus there are two opposing forces, repulsive electrostatic force and attractive strong nuclear force. So we need a good balance between these two opposite forces. If the if the balance between these two forces are not maintained properly, then a nucleus becomes unstable, so that the isotope is called unstable. That is also called radioactive isotopes, because those unstable isotopes tends to convert into stable isotopes of another element, and within this process they emit the excess amount of energy in form of radiation rays. And so actually radiation is a kind of change that takes place inside the nucleus, and this kind of change in nucleus can be categorized into 6 or 7 types, but we will only consider the 3 major types that changes that takes place inside the nucleus. So these 3 types of changes are called alpha decay, beta decay and gamma decay, and from these 3 types of decay 3 types of rays are produced. And while we were studying about alpha decay, we came across a term, that is phosphorescence, on zinc sulfide screen. That means some chemicals have the property to absorb the visible light energy and then emit a low intensity of light at the dark for several hours. Zinc sulfide, strontium, aluminate, some chemicals have such property of phosphorescence. And we have compared between the 3 types of radiation, alpha, beta and gamma, and there are different characteristics between them. We have considered them, discussed about these differences in detail in the previous class. And today inshallah we will discuss about a concept called half-life, and how is the age of fossils estimated, and the use of radioactivity. So at first, while we begin with the concept of half-life, what is called half-life in physics? There is a game you might know, FPS game, first person shooting game. You can find it in YouTube, but I'm not talking about it. So half-life is called the amount of time in which a radioactive isotope disintegrates exactly in half portion. We know that the radioactive isotopes undergoes disintegration into stable isotope of another element. So the time required to disintegrate exactly the half amount of atoms in a radioactive given sample, the time required is called the half-life of the radioactive isotope. So I repeat, the time required during which just half of the total number of radioactive atoms undergoes disintegration is called the half-life of that particular element. So the half-life is actually specific for each particular radioactive isotope. Some radioactive isotopes have longer half-life, billions of years. For example, isotopes of uranium, it has a half-life of several billion years, while the half-life of radon is about 3 days. And the half-life of the highly radioactive isotopes, like the atom number 118 or 117, they might have probably milliseconds of half-life. So the amount of time in half-life varies from isotope to isotope. So inshallah we will talk about the half-life of carbon-14 in a simulation. So let's see. And in the simulation we have been provided with about thousands of carbon-14 atoms, and these carbon-14 atoms are colored in red and they undergoes disintegration to produce blue colored nitrogen 14. So if we start the time, we see that the amount of carbon 14 atoms is decreasing and the number of nitrogen 14 atoms are increasing, and the graph shows that the decreasing amount of carbon 14 and the increasing amount of nitrogen 14. So we see that exactly there is 50% amount of carbon 14 and 50% nitrogen 14 at the 5740 years. So when we take a carbon 14 sample, and exactly after 5740 years later, we see that half portion remains and half portion converted into nitrogen. So we can say this example for uranium also. Uranium 238. Here you see that the number of uranium atoms is decreasing, and about 4.5 or 5 billion years the amount of uranium becomes half. That means the uranium has about 4.5 billion years of half-life. So now we will consider how carbon 14 can be used to determine the age of any fossil. Let's start with the example of a plant. So we know that in our atmosphere and in all living organisms, it contains a small amount of carbon 14 inside its body, and scientists know what is the amount of carbon 14 or what is the percentage of carbon 14 present inside a living organism. So if we plant a tree, we have taken a plant and the plant is growing. The plant has now age of 560 years and 850, 900, 940, 970, 1010 years. So this plant contains 100% of carbon 14 that it should consist. So the amount of carbon 14 it should contain, it contains 100% of it, because it is constantly absorbing carbon 14, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So it has a constant amount of carbon 14 in its body. But when we kill the tree, when the tree dies, the tree is killed now, so the plant has stopped absorbing the carbon 14 from the atmosphere, because that is no longer living and it cannot absorb carbon 14 from the atmosphere. So what happens, the stored carbon 14 inside its body is now disintegrating into nitrogen 14. So we see that the amount of carbon 14 is not 100% now, it has a 95.5. When the time was 110 years, now there is 1400 years, so about 390 years has gone, and within these 390 years a small amount of carbon 14 has been disintegrated. So we will see that just exactly after 5740 years, that means at the year of 6740 years, we will see that there is only 50% carbon 14 remaining. So you see that the amount of carbon 14 is decreasing day by day, year after year. So we will see that when there is the year of 6740, that means when the plant has when the dead body of the plant has passed the exact amount of half-life time, we will see that the amount of carbon 14 will become 50%. So you see that that is 6,810 years. We have skipped only 40 years. So within this time, we see that approximately there is 50% carbon-14 remaining. So by this process, scientists can have some mathematical equations and mathematical solutions. They came up with some mathematical formulas, and using those formulas and equations, they can determine how much years ago the plant or animal has died, based on the amount of carbon-14 present inside the body, inside the fossil. So here is also a game. For example, if we can know the amount of carbon-14 present in a fossil, we can get an idea about how much years ago it has died. For example, the sample contains about 88.2% carbon-14 than the normal. So how long ago it has died? It can be died. So from this graph we can estimate 88.2, 88. So we can estimate that it has died about 1030 years ago. 1030 years. So estimate. Okay. So I am correct. And for this bone, we can get an estimation 83.9, 83.9. So about 1400 years, 1412 years, 1420 years. So okay. So from the amount of carbon-14 present inside the body, inside a dead organism, we can approximately assume the amount of time, how much long ago the animal or plant has been died. We can determine its age. And now we will consider the uses of radioactivity. Radioactive isotopes are used for many practical and beneficial purposes. For example, in medical science, you have studied them in class 8 also, the use of radioactivity. In medical science, we use the radioactive isotopes to kill the cancer cells. How? The cobalt-60 is used in cancer treatment because cobalt-60 produces some radioactive rays, gamma rays, and these gamma rays can be targeted towards the specific cancer cells or tumor cells, and they can be killed precisely. So that we precisely apply the radioactive rays over it, so that the cancer cells are killed or damaged, but the healthy cells are not damaged. So you have to take precaution during this process. And iodine-131 is used for thyroid treatment, and phosphorus-32 is used for leukemia treatment. So in radiotherapy, we use these radioactive isotopes. Different suitable radioactive isotopes are used. And in agriculture, to produce high-yielding variety crops, scientists or breeders uses different radioactive rays and apply these radioactive rays over different crop varieties, crop plants, so that it changes the DNA and causes mutation inside the body of plant, so that most of the plants gets died, gets alternated. They have different consequences, bad characteristics, but among 1000 or several hundred plants, we will see that some of the plants will have beneficial mutation. For example, they have a large inflorescence, or they are taller in size, or any other. So scientists check for any kind of beneficial mutation taken place over this large sample of plant, and they sort these plants out which have good beneficial mutations, and they further cultivate them, and after them they release a new variety of plant or crop after a testing trial, after several years or after several decades. So in agriculture, we use radioactive isotopes to apply radiotherapy over different crop plants to produce beneficial mutation and to produce beneficial characteristics on them. And in industries, we use radiation for sterilization purpose. For example, cobalt 60 is used to produce radioactive rays to sterilize different surgical instruments. And in industry, it also have many uses, for example in thickness measurement, etc., or leakage detection. To determine the age of fossils, that is called radiometric dating, we have considered an example of this in the previous simulation. So now we will also talk about some dangers of radioactivity. Radioactive is very much risky to handle, to produce, because radioactive rays causes mutation inside the DNA, and in most of the cases the mutations are harmful one, and they damages the cellular organelles, and ultimately they leads to cancer cells. And what happened to Marie Curie? Marie Curie and Pierre Curie, they were the earlier frontier scientists who worked with the radioactive properties, radioactive rays, and at that time they were not conscious about the harmful effects of radioactive rays. So at the time they didn't take enough precaution while handling with these radioactive isotopes, and after several years or after a decade, they suffered from different cancer problems. Marie Curie suffered from leukemia and died, and most of the people thinks that most of the people's scientists thinks that actually the cause of leukemia of Marie Curie was his uncautious handling of radioactive isotopes. And what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki when USA bombed atomic bombs over Nagasaki and Hiroshima in 1945? So what happened? The radioactive rays killed thousands of people, millions of hundreds of thousands of people instantly in these two cities. And when the radioactive substances came out from the mushroom cloud of the atomic bombs, and these radioisotopes spreaded all over the places, surrounding places, and the people suffered from different diseases. They suffered from cancer later on. So the persons who survived at this catastrophe, later on they suffered from different cancer or different kind of disorders, and they also and when they became parent of their child, and the most of the child was born at that time were mutilated, or they have some kind of disorders in their physical appearance or physical organs. They have some disorders or disproportions. So but still we have different plants, nuclear power plants running in different countries of the world, and these nuclear power plants produces different radioactive waste materials. So every material they're used in the radioactive nuclear power plants, they became radioactive after some time. So these radioactive wastes or products, they should be disposed in a safe area so that they cannot come out to the public place and cause any harm to them. So radioactive waste management is very much crucial and critical, and that is very much sensitive topic. How to deal with them, how to bury them, and or how to dispose them safely. What is the safest place on the earth to bury them? So there are many much concern about this topic. So today we have what we learned. We learned about the concept of half-life, what is called half-life, and we know that the half-life of different element and different isotopes vary greatly. We know that, as an example of carbon-14, it has a half-life of 5,740 years, and we have observed and played with a simulation and saw that how the age of a fossil can be estimated. And there are many uses of radioactivity, and there are also many risks concerned about radioactivity. So today the class is finished. Hope all of you will remain safe by the grace of Allah. No more today. Allah Hafiz. Assalamu alaikum.